Whenever my husband leaves, the silence swells around me like fog. At first, it's just the quiet hum of the refrigerator, the distant ticking of the hallway clock. But soon it's in the walls, in my bones. The kind of quiet that doesn't feel peaceful, but abandoned. I pour coffee into a chipped mug and stare out at the pasture, pretending the emptiness isn't there, pretending I'm not counting the days until he comes home again. He travels often for work, sometimes 2 days, sometimes more. He never says much about where he's going, just that it's necessary, that we need the money, that he'll be back soon. I nod. I always nod. I say, of course, because that's what good wives do. Then I watch him pack his bag and walk out the door like he's stepping out of a scene I'm no longer part of. I try to keep busy. Laundry, dishes, reorganizing the books in the study. But the house stays stubbornly quiet, untouched by my efforts. Every room feels like a memory of something warmer, something fuller. I water the plants, though they never seem to grow. I change the sheets more often than I need to just for the comfort of fresh linen. At night, I lie on my side of the bed and stare at the dent where he used to sleep. I don't cry. I just trace the edge of the pillow with my fingers and wonder if he ever misses me like this, so deeply it hurts behind the ribs. We used to talk late into the night. Our bedroom used to hum with quiet laughter, fingers brushing under the covers, shared dreams whispered like secrets. Now, when we talk, it's about bills or groceries or the leak under the sink. The only time he really looks at me is when he's about to leave again. I never meant to grow attached to Donkey. It just happened. He was always there in the background, just another animal in our care. But lately, I've found myself drawn to him. He stands alone in the field, slow and quiet, just watching. There's something in the way his eyes follow me as I pass by. Something steady. Something that doesn't flinch. I started bringing him treats. Apples mostly. He'd bray softly when he saw me coming, and I'd find comfort in that sound. I'd sit by the fence and talk to him, about the weather, about how lonely the nights have become. He never interrupts, never shifts the conversation. He just listens. And that kind of listening? It starts to feel like understanding. I'm not foolish. I know he's just an animal. But sometimes, when I look into those deep, calm eyes, I feel more seen than I have in months. It's not love, not in the way people mean it. It's something quieter. Something that fills the hollow in my chest, even if only for a moment. The first time I stayed longer than usual by the fence, it was raining. A light drizzle. Nothing serious. Donkey stood there, unmoved, just blinking through the drops. I held the apple in my palm, and he nuzzled it gently, as if he knew I needed the softness. That was when I began to speak to him, not casually, not in passing, but truly speak, as if he could carry what I said and hold it without judgment. I told him things I hadn't said out loud in years, that I felt like a shadow inside my own marriage, that the nights stretched longer than they used to, and even when my husband came home, it was like the warmth never did. I said it softly, testing the weight of those words, and Donkey just stood there, ears twitching, chewing slowly. I remember feeling ashamed after, not because he didn't understand, but because part of me believed he did. It became a habit. Every morning after chores, I'd find him, brush his coat, run my hand along the ridge of his spine, tell him about the odd dreams I'd been having. Ones where I was running barefoot through open fields, no direction, just motion, and yet I never felt lost. I wondered aloud if it was a sign. He listened. Soon, I was telling him things I hadn't even admitted to myself. That I fantasized about being elsewhere, anyone else. That sometimes when my husband called, I let it ring twice just to feel like I had a choice. That the only time I smiled without trying lately was when I was with him, Donkey. He'd blink slowly in response, like an old friend who already knew. I found comfort in his presence. Not romantic, not sexual, just human. Or rather, the absence of human. No expectations. No confusion. He never looked at me with disappointment or impatience. There was a peace in that. I found myself waiting for those moments with him, lingering longer, losing track of time. I caught myself humming again. Not songs with lyrics, just soft notes that rose up from somewhere unguarded. One afternoon, I pressed my forehead against his and stayed like that for a long while. It felt like something sacred. I didn't move even when the wind picked up. He didn't either. I didn't think about what it meant, only how it made me feel safe, held, understood. My chest loosened for the first time in weeks. I knew how it looked. A woman alone, leaning too heavily on a creature that couldn't talk back. But it wasn't about logic. It was about survival. About needing something, anything, to anchor me while everything else drifted out of reach. I wasn't in love with Donkey. But I was no longer certain where the line between comfort and craving had gone. And maybe, just maybe, I didn't want to find it again. The night the storm came, I didn't expect it to feel like a breaking point. But something about the wind howling against the windows, the lights flickering, the sudden stillness between the thunder, it all pushed at something inside me that had been waiting to give in. I tried to distract myself. Read a book, folded laundry that didn't need folding. I even called my husband, but it went to voicemail. I didn't leave a message. I wrapped a blanket around my shoulders and stepped outside. The air was cold and damp, but I didn't feel it. My feet knew where they were going long before I admitted it to myself. When I reached the stable, Donkey was already awake, his ears turning toward me before I even made a sound. I opened the gate and stepped in without hesitation. No fear. No hesitation. He was warm, the way a living thing is warm when you're cold to your core. I sat down beside him on the straw-covered floor and rested my head against his side. The rain tapped steadily on the roof above, and inside that rhythm, I heard my own breathing, shallow and uneven. I started talking again. Not softly this time. Not carefully. I told him I was tired. That pretending had become exhausting. That I missed being wanted, being noticed, being needed. I said that my husband didn't ask about my days anymore. Didn't look at me like he used to. That maybe I'd become invisible in my own life and no one even noticed I was fading. Except him. Donkey, with his unchanging gaze. Never turning away. The words poured out like confession, like sin leaving my body. I didn't cry. I spoke with a strange calm, like I was finally saying something that had lived in me too long. And when I finished, I leaned closer, wrapped my arms loosely around his neck, and stayed there. He didn't move. Didn't flinch. The silence between us felt complete. Whole. Then, without thinking, I pressed a kiss to his head. Not out of romance, not desire. Just instinct. A human need to show gratitude for being heard, for being allowed to fall apart without being judged. But the kiss lingered too long. Not because I meant it to, but because I didn't want to let go of that one moment where I felt seen. Fully, dangerously seen. I pulled away slowly, unsure of what I'd done, unsure if it even mattered. After all, he was still just an animal. But I didn't feel right as I stood. I felt exposed. Like something inside me had crossed a line I couldn't define, let alone defend. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed listening to the storm pass and thought about the stillness in that stable, about the way his eyes had followed me as I left. I didn't know what I had become, only that I couldn't go back to pretending nothing had changed. Something had. Quietly. Permanently. He came back on a Tuesday. No warning, just the sound of his car in the gravel and the door opening like nothing had shifted. He kissed my cheek, said he missed me, and handed me a souvenir mug from some city he barely remembered. I smiled like I meant it, thanked him, and placed the mug beside the others collecting dust on the shelf. I asked how the trip went. He said fine. I said good. We fell back into our usual choreography, shared space, separate lives. He didn't ask how I'd been, not really. He noticed I was quieter, maybe more distant, but he didn't press. That's always been our rhythm. He never digs too deep, and I never make it obvious I want him to. We sat through dinner like we hadn't forgotten how to talk, though every sentence felt like a placeholder. He didn't notice the way I glanced out the window more than usual. Or maybe he did, and chose not to mention it. That night, when he reached for me in bed, I didn't flinch. But I didn't lean in either. I let him touch me, go through the motions, finish, turn away. I stared at the ceiling, breathing through the weight of it, wondering if he could feel the difference. Maybe he thought it was just another dry spell. Another quiet period in a long marriage. But for me, something had calcified, solidified. Whatever I once longed for in his return no longer existed. The next morning, I made breakfast like I always did. Eggs, toast, silence. He scrolled through his phone. I sipped my coffee. We looked like a functioning couple from the outside, and maybe that was enough for him. But I found myself waiting for him to leave the room, to grab something from the car or take a call. The moment he stepped out, I slipped on my boots and stepped into the air like it was the only thing still capable of reaching me. I walked straight to Donkey. Not out of guilt, not even out of need, out of habit, out of comfort. He greeted me like nothing had changed, as if no time had passed. I touched his face, and for a moment, the ache in my chest softened. He didn't ask anything of me. He never did. He simply existed, steady and present, and that was more than I could say for most things in my life. Later, as I sat beside him again, I whispered words I hadn't dared to admit aloud until then. I said I loved my husband, but I also said love wasn't always enough. That being married didn't mean being fulfilled. That sometimes the loneliest place to be was beside the person who once knew you best. I don't know what's right anymore. I don't know what this makes me. But when I'm here, when I'm with Donkey, I feel real again. And maybe that's the saddest part, how something so simple, so quiet, can become the only thing that makes you feel alive.